Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back and study an era which both archaeologists and anthropologists refer to today as the Plastic Age, as we peek in on a band that, with a little bit of help from MTV in 1981, forever revolutionized the way that young people consume and process their music. That band, of course, being the BUGGLES. Now, the BUGGLES were formed in London, England in 1977 by bassist and singer Trevor Horn and keyboardist Jeff Downes. According to keyboardist Jeff Downes, the name BUGGLES was born out of a play on words based on the Beatles. Singer Trevor Horn has been quoted as calling the name awful, saying he often regrets calling himself BUGGLES, but he contends that the band's name was a product of the punk era, an era where the common goal among young and upcoming bands was to come up with the most disgusting name possible, regardless of how it would be interpreted or marketed in the future. Personally, I've always liked the name BUGGLES. Of course, I haven't had to live with it for the past 40 plus years, but I've always liked it. I've always thought it was a cool name. Dare I say, I think it's pretty snuggles. In 1979, the band signed with Island Records and began working on their debut album, The Age of Plastic, which was released in 1980. In 1981, the band released their sophomore effort, Adventures in Modern Recording. And basically by the end of 1981, this band was nothing more than a memory. As far as my personal connection goes with this band, this is a band that I have probably always sort of been familiar with. This is a band that, of course, their biggest hit, Video Killed the Radio Star, is a song that I don't even remember the first time hearing it. But I can remember going back as long as I can the first time I heard Video Killed the Radio Star, until this past week, as I've been listening to both of these records on heavy rotation, trying to write down some ideas about them, that it is a song that I have actually never gotten tired of. Now, there are a few of those songs from the early 80s from artists that, dare I call them, a one-hit wonder. There's some of the certain songs that I never get tired of, this being one of them. Actually, I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine this past week, and we were talking about the song Kids in America by Kim Wilde. That is another one of those sort of 80s one-hit wonder songs that I've just never gotten tired of. Gary Newman Cars is another one that no matter how many times I hear it, I still love that song. Now, on the opposite end of that teeter-totter, there are certainly songs from the 1980s, whether they're one-hit wonders or not, but a song like Whip It by Devo, which is a song that I could just never hear again and be totally fine with. My wife and I are actually getting ready to go see Devo here in May at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee. And I suspect that when they play the song Whip It, the crowd will, of course, whip themselves, get it, into a frenzy. And I will feel the urge to probably take a pee break if it weren't that when they play the song Whip It, Devo plays the song at triple tempo just to get it over with. But this song, Video Killed the Radio Star, of course, was my first introduction to the band. And it's a song that I've never gotten tired of. Now, I do remember the first time I actually bought this record. I bought it on CD, the first time I ever owned it. And I bought this CD not long after I moved to the Bay Area. This was a CD that I had always kind of looked for when I was living up in my hometown of Chico. Could never really find it in any of the record stores that we had up in Chico. But I remember Back in those days, they probably still have it, because they had it up until semi-recently when I was living there not too long ago. But back in the 90s, at least in Oakland, they had the most awesome flea market at the old drive-in theater. And that's actually where I found my first copy of the BUGGLES, The Age of Plastic record on CD. And at the time I found it, I don't know that I was or wasn't necessarily specifically looking for it as far as on my trips to the local record store, but I remember I found it at the flea market for like $2. And because I had never been able to find it in record stores in the past when I was looking for it, I had somehow convinced myself that it was very rare and probably out of print and something that most people had forgotten about it. And I remember I paid like $2 or $3 for the CD, which was still sealed, by the way. I couldn't have been any more pleased with that. So I remember I ran over to my ex-girlfriend at the time, and I showed her. Of course, it was on CD at the time. I showed her. I was like, "Look what I finally found!" And she looked at me and was like, "I didn't know you were looking for that." And I was like, "Yeah, this thing's super rare. I think it's out of print. Nobody ever has it." And she looked at me as if I had just failed a third grade spelling test. And she said, "That's not rare. I don't know what you're talking about. They have that CD everywhere." She's like, "If you want to get it. It's $3. I'm not arguing with you. Just go ahead and pick it up." I was like, "No, you don't understand. This is like worth money. This guy's an idiot. $3? You gotta be kidding me." So of course I picked it up. I took it home. I listened to it, and there were basically two songs on this record that I was familiar with really before I bought it. Two songs I totally loved. One, of course, being Video Killed the Radio Star. The other one being the title track, Living in the Plastic Age. So I knew that I loved both of those songs, but you never know when you buy a whole album how it's going to translate. Is it just one of those situations where it has like one or two good songs on it and the rest of it is, total clunkage? But I could not wait to take the CD home. I listened to it, and this was a record that just completely blew me away start to finish. This is a record that to this day I still love. I still listen to it on pretty heavy rotation, to be honest with you. And just to finish that story, yes, the next time that girlfriend and I went to one of our local record stores, I'm sure it was probably either Rasputin or Amoeba in Berkeley, she specifically walked me over to the B section on the CDs, and she promptly pointed out to me the fact that they had about 8 of these CDs used. So, egg on my face. Maybe it wasn't as rare as I thought it was, but I still got it for like $3. I mean, anyway, what do you want from me? Anyway, this record came out on January 10th, 1980. According to singer Trevor Horn, this record was heavily influenced by Kraftwerk's Man Machine. Keyboardist Jeff Downes describes this record as being science fiction with a twist of psychedelic. I really love that description. Like I said, to me, this record is an absolute essential in any record collection. If you don't own this record, I'm forced to ask you, what are you doing with your life? This is a record that should be in every record collector's collection. Like I said, I first bought this record back in 1996 on CD, and it is a record that I still listen to in heavy rotation. I love this era of the sort of, early post-punk, early new wave. To me, this record sounds as fresh and as vibrant today as it must have sounded in 1980 when it first came out. This record was produced by the band. I've always said sometimes I don't necessarily think that it's the best idea for bands to self-produce their records. Sometimes I think that having an impartial third voice, where a third idea come in sometimes to sort of steer the ship through sort of murky seas is a good idea. But I think in the case of this band, especially with this record in particular, I think that Trevor Horn and Jeff Downs had a very specific vision of what they were going for, and I think that they accomplished it. I don't know that this record could really be any better. I agree with what Jeff Downs said. This is a very sort of new wave record. It is very science fiction with a psychedelic twist, but it's also like progressive and futuristic sounding. This, to me, the BUGGLES don't really fit into one sort of subcategory. That's one of my favorite things about them. But in my conversations with people, the way I describe this band, I've always described them as prog wave. Now, I don't know if that is something that actually exists or if that's something that I should patent. Dibs on it right now if it doesn't already exist, by the way. But I would describe this record as being sort of prog wave, science fiction with a psychedelic twist. And yes, there is definitely a little bit of, Kraftwerk, Man Machine mixed in there. One thing that this band has over Kraftwerk, and I love Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk are one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time. But Trevor Horn's voice, his singing voice, I think is one of the most underrated voices in the history of music, especially in this era. To me, this record still sounds to me futuristic. This record, every time I listen to it, sounds like it isn't supposed to come out for like 10 years. I said the same thing when I talked about the first Suicide record. To me, the first Suicide record is another record that to me sounds like it's from 20 years in the future, and in 20 years it will sound like it's in 20 years from the future then. To me, this is a record, like I said, if you don't own this record, you need to get off of your couch and go secure yourself a copy if you want my approval. And who doesn't, right? Anyway, the first song on this record is the title track, sort of, Living in the Plastic Age. I think this song is about technology. And as technology improves, the virtual slowly replaces the tangible. And the population is slowly programmed to believe that the virtual is far superior to that of the tangible, and those of us who hang on to the tangible, both the tangible and those of us who cling to it, are relics of the past. I think this song is very prophetic, considering it came out in 1980, and of course now we do live basically in the plastic age. This is the sort of future that this song talks about. Of course, those of us who still are record collectors are, I think, to some people we are considered to be sort of relics. Although when I do go to my local record stores, here or anywhere else, but here especially around Nashville, most of my local record stores still have at least a niche community. There are those of us who are hanging on to the past, I guess, a little bit. I do love this song. It is very prophetic. This is something that reminds me also, my wife the other day was sort of just tinkering around on her little laptop iPad thing. I'm clearly not a technophile. But she started dabbling around with some AI kind of things. She was working on Canva. She was actually doing a little bit of sort of design work, just kind of messing around. And she started playing around with some AI, and she showed me what the AI came up with as far as the design that she was working on. And I have to tell you, it kind of made me want to drop a log in my trunks. It was a little bit uneasy. I guess it's because I really did not grow up. I am not techno-native. I read one time that the biggest line of demarcation between your culture, your generation and the generation previous and post your generation, the two things that really are a line of demarcations are, pop culture and technology. And I did not grow up on the internet. I am Generation X. I grew up without the internet at all. My wife is a millennial, so for her, she's a little bit more, techno-native than I am. So I don't know that this stuff necessarily weirds her out as much as it does me, but she was showing me some stuff she was coming up with on the AI, and it kind of made my skin crawl. I don't know how you feel about it, but I was not really a big fan of it. This song, however, I am a big fan of. Living in the Plastic Age. The next song after that is the song, according to a lot of people who are familiar with the BUGGLES. I think it is very unfair that this band has sort of been labeled to or assigned to the category of being a one-hit wonder, because this song, to me, it is a great song. Like I said earlier, I never get tired of it. And this song is sort of representative of the album. I say sometimes that I feel like songs that are one-hit wonders or one-hits for bands aren't always representative of what the band sounds like. I've said this. I don't like the song Whip It. I don't know if I've made that clear enough on these videos yet, but I am a huge Devo fan. But I don't like the song Whip It. I always feel like the song Whip It isn't very representative of what most of Devo's catalog is. Now, this song, I do believe, fits right on this record. I think it fits right in the band's catalog. On August 1st, 1981, this song was the first ever video played on the new cable channel MTV. Of course, that's what it's most known for. The video of this song is another thing that I never get tired of. I absolutely love the video for this song. The trivia question is to who was the Buzz Aldrin of MTV, as far as if the BUGGLES video killed the radio star was the Neil Armstrong, who was the Buzz Aldrin of MTV? The Buzz Aldrin of MTV was Pat Benatar when they played her song You Better Run, which was the second song ever played on MTV. To me, this song is about the birth of television and the death of old-fashioned radio. I think makes it fitting for the use of it as the kickoff to MTV. I'm sure people that worked in commercial radio back in 1981 weren't ecstatic about this new cable channel. Of course, sadly, college radio still hangs on today, although college radio, or commercial radio, I should say. College radio is awesome, but commercial radio is in as sad a state as you can possibly imagine. Sometimes I wish that they would just put commercial radio out of its misery. Not that I really go around and listen to commercial radio very often, but this past week here in Nashville, I don't know if this was a national thing or not, but this past week in Nashville, my wife and I have AT&T on our phones, and we had a service interruption this week for AT&T. And I always have in my car, I always have my phone on my Bluetooth, and I just play music off of Spotify or other streaming services. And it wasn't working because we didn't have cell service. So I actually, for about 25 minutes this week, I listened to a little bit of commercial radio on my commute to work one morning, and ooh, doggy, it is in sad shape. I remember when I was in middle school and high school, my dream job, all through middle school and high school, was that I wanted to get into broadcasting. Probably radio, judging by my face. But that was my dream job, was to get into commercial radio, be a disc jockey, work in sort of music. The state of commercial radio nowadays, I'm glad that is a career that never really took off. Of course, nowadays with podcasting and this sort of YouTube medium, I mean, this is kind of exciting. This is ways for people to broadcast themselves, I guess, without having to get into that line of work. But I was listening to commercial radio, like I said, for like 25 minutes this week, and man, it is just nasty. I think on one of my videos last week, I was talking about a radio station you should check out. Speaking of which, KZFR up in my hometown of Chico, California. If you're ever bored streaming around town in your car, put on KZFR if you want to hear some good radio. Anyway, the third song on this record is a song called Kid Dynamo. Man, another song I absolutely love. There's really nothing off this record that isn't good. This record does not have a single bad song. It doesn't have a single, to me, it doesn't have a single boring second on the entire record. I think this song is about sort of the fleeting nature of fame. There's a lyric in this song that makes reference to the media, building stars Our minds will not change, only our cars. I think basically it's talking about how the media can sort of elevate and then just destroy people who they push into the public spotlight. They build some people up to being almost the point of holy figures. Of course, there's somebody who is popular in today's music culture that comes to mind. But once the media is done with them, they can just completely destroy their careers, tear them back down, make them lower than they ever were before. God, I hope that happens to Taylor Swift. What it makes me think of, if this is the case, if this is what this song is about, was the whole Britney Spears thing that happened several years ago. Now, I'm not a Britney Spears fan. I'm not really a hater either. I'm just somebody who, wants people to go out there and try to be happy. But Britney Spears is somebody who at one time was as huge and popular as the media could have possibly made her. Now, in my opinion, Britney Spears is somebody who has a limited amount of talent, a limited amount of intelligence, but she was somebody that the media and the record companies sort of, lifted up to these lofty heights. She was probably not quite as popular right now as Taylor Swift is, but she was definitely, close to that plane, at least for a little while. And then several years ago, as she began to sort of fall apart emotionally, if you watch the way that the media covered her, and of course, sadly, she sort of had a nervous breakdown right in front of the public eye. I thought it was very sad. Like I said, I'm not necessarily a fan of hers, but I also am not somebody who enjoys, the misfortune of others. And if you watch the way that the media covered her sort of emotional crises, it was the top story of every news show in the country. And if you watch the way the media covered it, I got the impression, at least, that they just really wanted a body on their hands. They were not going to be happy unless Britney Spears committed the ultimate tragic act. And as I watched the coverage of her sort of emotionally fall apart, I could not help but just feel so terrible for her. And the media really showed their fangs in the way they covered that. And that's what it makes me think of in this song. And that's something that, our Royal Highness Taylor Swift, that's something that she better beware of, because as popular as she is nowadays, and I don't get it at all, but as popular as she is, man, she could be in for one hell of a fall if she falls out of grace with the media and the star makers in the music industry. But if you go back and you watch, or you look back, or you think back the way that they covered the whole Britney Spears collapse, that was really disgusting. I also was watching, another person I kind of mislabeled them when they were live. Somebody I'm not the hugest fan of either, but I used to wrongly assume, that Amy Winehouse was sort of that kind of Britney Spears, Katy Perry sort of, bubble-headed pop star. Now, I was totally wrong in assuming that, but it was just something that I assumed. But if you go back and you watch the Amy documentary, which to me is one of the best music documentaries ever made, and you watch the way the British, especially the British paparazzi, the way that they covered her as she was sort of like teetering on the edge and as she began to unravel, oh man, it was really disgusting. At least for them, in that case, they did get a body. Fortunately for Britney Spears, she was able to sort of pull out of her tailspin a little bit, according to what I've been told, and I don't investigate these matters myself, but but according to what I've been told by people, the Britney Spears social media follow is quite the interesting ride, though. So, but you can't really blame her for that. The next song after that closes out side one. This song is called "I Love You, Miss Robot." Instrumentally, I really love this song. I love the bass playing in this song. I mentioned earlier, I think that Trevor Horn to me, is one of the most underrated singers in the history of rock and roll, especially this very early 1980s, early new wave, early post-punk era. But man, as a bassist, he can really shred it too. You feel this song like in your seeds. To me, this song is fairly self-explanatory. Again, now that we're living in 2024, this song is very prophetic. This song is sort of about the concept of like a virtual girlfriend or an AI girlfriend. I mentioned earlier that the whole AI phenomenon is something that kind of makes my teeth ache a little bit. I'm afraid that we as humans, as a species, have almost become obsessed with our own extinction. And there's something about it that frightens me. And maybe I am like the crazy guy on the corner with the sandwich board and the megaphone, but that's just how I feel. Something about the way that we are just like hell-bent on replacing ourselves. We're hell-bent on, forcing our own extinction. That's how it feels to me. Something about it, just doesn't sit right with me, but that's what this song kind of reminds me of. The whole idea of like a virtual girlfriend is something that is, again, I grew up in the 1980s. I mean, I don't know. Even the Jetsons were married to each other, and that seemed pretty futuristic back then. But there's something like very narcissistic about wanting to have, like a virtual spouse, somebody that just, caters to everything you want, somebody who thinks that everything you say is smart and funny and your farts don't stink. I mean, there's something sort of like narcissistic about this whole generation, this whole like thing. But I don't like it. You'll never catch me with a virtual girlfriend. I'll tell you that much. Probably would get rejected by one anyway. The first song on side 2 is a song called Clean Clean. Man, another song I absolutely love. This song is about a group of soldiers who have just left one military engagement and are en route to the next. I think lyrically this song is sort of the reflections of the soldiers as they are in transit in between the two. I think this song talks about the war and people they've left behind. I think this is a very deep song, a very cool song. One of my favorite songs on the entire record. But the next song on the record is my favorite song on the record. That is the song Else Tree. This song is a tribute to a film studio in the UK called Else Tree Studios. The character in this song has aspirations of becoming like the next Orson Welles, but instead ends up working in a much more pedestrian capacity behind the scenes, just at some film studio. This person ends up, looking back on their lives with sadness and regret. Maybe they never had the courage to chase that dream. Maybe, they went in for like one audition and, they were rejected and they gave up. You never know, but there's a sadness and there's like a real regret in the lyrics of the song. Else Tree is easily my favorite song on this record, if not my favorite song in the entire band's catalog. I like how it says, "Remember me, I played a part in a B movie." I love that song. As a movie lover, I love it too. I had to throw in Orson Welles because Citizen Kane is one of my favorite movies of all time. The next song after that is a song called Astro Boy and the Proles on Parade. Musically, I love this song. This song sounds like a futuristic kind of lounge song. If Frank Sinatra were performing in the year 2525, perhaps. Now, I don't know if this song was written about the comic book Astro Boy, but it sure as hell could have been, because both the song and this comic book rule. I love this song. I love this comic book, by the way. Now, I'm not necessarily the hugest fan of anime or manga or whatever. And I know when I say manga, it just makes me sound like an old guy who doesn't really get what it is, which is pretty much what I am. But I do love this comic book Astro Boy. I had to throw it in there because the song Astro Boy Another one of my favorite songs off this record. This record closes out with probably my second favorite song on the record. This song is called Johnny on the Monorail. This song is like dark, proggy, pulsating, electronic new wave. This song always makes me think of Seattle, talking about the monorail. I remember the first time I moved to Seattle and the first time I actually rode the monorail. I remember before I moved to Seattle thinking that the monorail was like a citywide transit system like you would find in San Francisco with Muni or the L in Chicago or, the New York subway system. I thought it was a train that would take you anywhere you want to go around town. But if you've been to Seattle, you are aware that the monorail is basically, it's just kind of a tourist attraction. It takes you from the Space Needle downtown to Westlake Center. It's 2 stops, and there's no stops in between. And I remember being slightly disappointed the first time I realized what the monorail in Seattle is, because when I first moved to Seattle, I thought, man, I'll take the monorail to work. It's going to be so cool. It's so futuristic looking, which it kind of is, actually. The monorail is funny because it was built, way back for the World's Fair. I believe it was 1964, 68 in Seattle. But it still looks cool. It is a fun ride if you've never done it. It was just a little disappointing to me that it wasn't a citywide transit system. Now, I guess if you live on Queen Anne and you work right downtown, by the Westlake Center, I guess you could technically take the monorail to and from work every day. Although it's not an inexpensive transit system, if you will. If you go back and if you're an Elvis fan like I am, there's an Elvis movie called It Happened at the World's Fair. Now, I will defend Elvis and his movies, most of them, to most people. But the Elvis film, It Happened at the World Fair, man, it is nothing nice. It is one of his worst movies, and there's a few that I would put up there. Kissin' Cousins is the worst, however. But there is a scene in that movie where Elvis actually rides the monorail in Seattle, and every time I rode the monorail, that sort of visual popped back into my head. There's also a scene in that movie where a very young Kurt Russell, who was a child actor, appears in that movie with Elvis. And one thing that I thought was cool about that was if you go back and you watch the movie, I think it came out in the late 90s, a movie called 3,000 Miles to Graceland, a movie I love, a movie that some people think is garbage, but I love it. I think it's very snug. But Kurt Russell is in that movie, and he plays an Elvis impersonator. He is part of this gang of Elvis impersonators who rob a casino in Las Vegas. And there's a scene where he's in the elevator dressed up as Elvis, and this young girl approaches him for an autograph, and she's holding an Elvis record for him to sign. Now, the cool thing about this scene is the Elvis movie, or the Elvis album that she's holding for him to sign, is the soundtrack to the movie It Happened at the World's Fair, which Kurt Russell appeared in as a kid, and now he's appearing in this movie as Elvis, signing this record. I think it's pretty cool. I think whoever directed that scene got it pretty right. Anyway, in 1980, late 1980, while Trevor Horn and Jeff Downs began work on their sophomore release, they were made aware that progressive rock band Yes were recording in a studio right next door to where the BUGGLES were at that time struggling to produce really any sort of new material. Trevor Horn was a big fan of Yes, a band that had coincidentally just lost their bassist Rick Wakeman and singer John Anderson. Eventually, Horn and Downs were invited to replace Anderson and Wakeman in the band Yes, and they recorded the band Drama with the band Yes. Now, for the fans of Yes, this turned out to be a deal breaker. Both the record and the tour for Drama were commercial disasters, and yes, eventually broke up in 1980. But in between the two records by the BUGGLES, Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes briefly appeared with the band. Yes. Now, in early 1981, the band returned to the studio to record their sophomore record, Adventures in Modern Recording. Now, on the first day of recording, Jeff Downes left the band, citing both creative differences with Trevor Horn as well as frustration with Island Records. Downes would eventually go on to help form the band Asia. But when Downes left the BUGGLES, it sort of left Horn kind of holding the bag. He was going to push forward, put out the second record, record and release the second record, and he was forced to do so with sort of a group of collaborators and studio musicians. And I think the result was that this record, Adventures in Modern Recording, has a completely different sound than the first one. Now, this record to me is good. I do like this record. I mentioned before that this record right here is an essential. If you don't own this record, you're basically wasting your time. Now, this record to me is good. I really do enjoy this record. To me, it is not as good as the original one. It has a completely different sound, which is to be expected. You want bands to evolve. You want them to explore, different musical directions. To me, this record is a little bit less new wavy. It's a little bit more, progressive. I think it still has a lot of new wave elements, but I feel like, prog is sort of starting to take over the armrest a little bit on this one. It's a little bit more proggy than sometimes I'm comfortable with. I do love this record, though. I also mentioned that the last record, The Age of Plastic, is a record that to me still sounds like futuristic. It doesn't even sound new. It sounds as if it's 20 years from now. This record to me hasn't aged, quite as well. It sounds a little bit more dated. This record is much more difficult to find than the first one. Understandably, I don't think that this record did as well. I don't know that it is in as high demand nowadays. Ironically, when I found this record used at a used record store a long time ago. I noticed that the bottom of the front sleeve has got there's some tread off the tire down there, but the record still sounds great. I remember I found this record, and this is the UK import, but I found this record for $8 or $9. I was completely shocked. Because this record isn't rare, I'm not going to make the same mistake talking about this one as I did with the Plastic Age, but this record's much more difficult to come by, at least finding it, out in the wild. I've had this record for probably about a year and a half, I think, maybe 2 years I've had this record. And I definitely don't listen to it as much as I do. The first one, that being said, though, there's a lot of great stuff on this. And I mentioned before Trevor Horn as a singer, and that's one way I do think that this record is superior to the one before it is. Trevor Horn's singing voice on this record is just the jugs, in my opinion. Anyway, the first song on this record was released, by the way, on December 11th, 1981. To me, the first song is the title track, Adventures in Modern Recording. To me, the song kind of sounds like Yes a little bit. It's definitely progressive. It after kind of a progressive intro, it sort of drops into more of a new wave kind of vibe as the song really begins. To me, this song is basically about the difference between genuinely crafted music and music that is designed and created, for maximum commercialism. Now, living down here in Nashville, now I am not a country music guy at all, really. I do like some of the stuff that my wife likes, some of the kind of Lost Dog street band, hobo punk country stuff that's semi-popular nowadays, but I'm not a big country music fan. But living here in Nashville, there's something I like about the romanticism of the kid showing up in Nashville with $10 and a guitar and a notebook full of songs, and he's going to come to Nashville and he's going to work his way up Broadway, and eventually he's going to become one of the biggest country music stars in the world. I love that romanticism. I love that imagery. I love thinking of that kid pulling into the city from some small town in the middle of nowhere, rolling into the Greyhound bus station. But sadly, that's really not how it works. I mean, the music industry is basically a mafia. To those people, you aren't an artist. You're more of a commodity. You're only worth how much money you can bring into the record company or whatever. So I think it's sad, when you kind of realize, what the record industry is really like, as opposed to how you kind of want it to be romantically in your head. Now, that's not to say that there aren't artists who go out there who are, creating unique, music. But I do think that, generally speaking, I think that especially in a town like Nashville, which is such an industry town, people are paid to write songs that are hits. They match people to songs based on the person's appearance, based on the lyrics of the song. It's all a big machine. It's very little of it is left up to chance. So I think that this song kind of touches on that. It's the romantic idea of what music is like when it is organic versus the reality of the situation when it is basically mechanized. The next song after that is a song called Beatnik. I don't really love this song. This might actually be my least favorite song on either of the two BUGGLES records. To me, musically, this song sounds like a cross between new wave and rockabilly, and although I will grant you that is a unique sound, to me it is not a sound that is particularly pleasing. Lyrically, I don't really understand what this song is about. Somebody told me one time that they thought that this song was about Charles Manson. It could be. It's hard to sort of ascertain that, from the lyrical content. But Beatnik is not necessarily a song that I love. The next song after that is right back on track as far as I'm concerned. The song is called Vermilion Sands, one of my favorite songs in the entire BUGGLES catalog. Again, this has that sort of futuristic kind of lounge feel. This song makes you feel like, you're kind of laying on your back, just floating down a very peaceful stream on like the most perfect day imaginable. The song is based on a collection of science fiction short stories by an author named J.G. Ballard, a book that came out in 1971 called The Sands of Vermilion. The stories in the book take place in an imaginary, vacation resort, sort of, modeled after something like you might find in Palm Springs. So the fact that the music kind of makes you feel like you're lounging, on floating down a quiet stream, or maybe floating in the pool. I think instrumentally they nailed the subject matter of the song. Side one of this record ends with a song called I Am a Camera. To me, this is another song that is probably one of the best songs on the record. This song also has a very cool video which appeared on MTV back in the days. To me, this song is about making memories, storing them in your head, living life through your eyes, not necessarily through the camera lens. Of course, this makes you think of nowadays, where we are all, myself included, I'm not better than anybody, but so many of us are so screen addicted that a lot of us aren't necessarily, taking in what's going on in the world around us. I get so burnt out when I go to live shows, being around people who are watching the entire show through their phone. It always makes me, think to myself, why don't you just watch the show? You're right here. Take it in with your own eyes and your ears and all of your senses instead of numbing it through this device. Now, like I said, I spend as much time doom scrolling on my phone as anybody. I'm not any better than anybody else. But I like the message in this song. I think it is about basically, take in life through your eyes and through your ears and through your nose. Life is short, so make the best of it. The next song on this record is the one that starts off side 2. This is a song called On TV. This song to me has a very Kraftwerk influence. Kind of a throwback to the first record. Like I said, I think this record sounds a lot different than the first record, but I think that this song is, kind of a throwback to the first record. Fairly self-explanatory. I think it's kind of in the same vein as the last song, I Am a Camera. Basically, the song paints a picture of somebody who spends all of their time, watching television, or to put it in today's perspective, staring at your phones. There's a lyric I love in this song where it says, you squeeze your life in between, basically saying the guy squeezes life in the song in between what he's watching on TV. I feel like it's the same way nowadays with us and our devices. Life is kind of getting more and more pushed out, genuine life, actual life, compared to the time that we spend staring at these machines that they have given to keep us obedient, I guess. But I do like the song. Again, it's very prophetic to today. The only thing different is instead of it being TV, it's these little handheld devices. But I think that lyrically it is very relevant to the life that we live today. The next song after that is a song called Inner City. Very sort of proggy new wave, instrumental on this song. I really like this song a lot. I picture the character in this song showing up at, the train station. It says they've got a suitcase in their hand. And I picture them, it says that they are, waiting for the last train into the inner city. I picture this song, or at least the way I interpret this song, or the way I relate to this song, is this is somebody who is moving to the big city for the first time from their home out in the rural country. At least that's the way that I, sort of personalize this song. It does remind me of my journey from growing up in a rural situation to the first time in 1996, the first time I moved to a more urban experience, and the sort of growing pains you have to go through, and the lack of street smarts that you can sometimes exhibit as you sort of get to know your new surroundings. I remember specifically when I first moved down to the Bay Area from my hometown, a very rural area. I remember one time I was supposed to go meet somebody in Oakland, and I had just moved down there maybe a couple months before. I did not know Oakland very well. I'd only been to Oakland proper a few times before I moved to the Bay Area. When I was a kid, we went down to San Francisco a lot, and I wouldn't even known San Francisco, but we used to at least go to San Francisco. But I didn't spend hardly any time as a kid in Oakland. And I remember I had an address, and back in those days, this was something that I had to learn also, but I remember it was a numbered street, and I had to go find this place in Oakland, and I thought I was in the right area. But I was looking for somebody's house, and I kept kind of going up and down this street. Now, the neighborhood I was at in Oakland was pretty scuzzy, to put it nicely. And I kept kind of going up and down these streets. I was looking for this address, which I could not find for the life of me. And I was sure I was in the right spot. I was on the right numbered street. So it had to be here somewhere. And I remember, of course, this is before GPS or cell phones. I had the address written down. It was sitting on the passenger seat next to me, and I kept looking at the address, and I kept looking for the number on the street, and I could not find it. And, like I said, I'm in a neighborhood that isn't necessarily a place that you want to get lost in. But I had no street smarts at that time. I grew up in a very small town. We didn't have any bad neighborhoods. It was something that I was totally oblivious to. I was probably better off that I was oblivious, because at least the obliviousness probably kept me somewhat safe. I mean, even the guys in the neighborhood were probably, who's this fucking guy? What's he doing? But eventually, I ended up getting pulled over by an Oakland cop. Now, looking back on it, I assume that he thought I was either trolling for drugs or just up to some sort of general no good, because I kept going up and down these streets looking for this address. And he pulled me over and he's like, "What in the hell are you doing over here?" Not friendly about it, basically very matter of fact, like, "What in the hell are you doing? Why are you here? You don't belong here. What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm looking for this house." And I showed him the address. He looked at me and he's like, "You're not even close. Like, what are you doing?" And he was the one that had to explain to me the concept of, like, West 30th Street and East 30th Street, or any number you want to throw out there. Basically, I was looking for, like, West something street, West 24th Street, we'll just say. But I was clear on the other side of town on East 24th Street. And if you know anything about Oakland at all, at least back in the 1990s, the East numbered streets were not necessarily a place you want to spend a lot of your free time. So I remember I learned a very valuable lesson that day from a Oakland police officer who taught me the difference between West 24th Street and East 24th Street. And he sort of pointed me in the right direction. I remember specifically, too, he said, "Man, you need to get out of here. I'm not going to come clean you up in an hour after it gets dark." And I was like, "Yes, sir." Because until he sort of explained to me the peril or potential peril I was in, I had totally oblivious to the whole situation. The next song after that is a song called Lenny, another song I really love. This is a song that allows or invites your most generic and unfunny friend to say, "More cowbell!" I don't know who the Lenny is in this song, but I assume that he's a great man of science. He talks about the Earth revolving around the sun. I'm assuming talking a little bit about Galileo. I've also read that people think that Lenny is in reference to Leonardo da Vinci, which is possible. I don't know. I'm not really sure who Lenny is. I am sure, however, that I do love this song. The last song on this record is a song called Rainbow Warrior. I really love this song. It kind of reminds me of The Cars, the band The Cars. Very heavily influenced either by The Cars, or The Cars were very heavily influenced by this song. Sort of a chicken and egg argument. But that is the last song on this record. Like I said, I went back and listened to both of these records this week. Now, I listen to The Age of Plastic all the time. This is a record I still listen to in pretty high rotation, to be honest with you. But I hadn't gone back and listened to Adventures in Modern Recording in a little while, and I have to tell you that going back and listening to it, even though I would say it is the weaker of the two albums, it is good enough that it makes me wonder why this band didn't last longer, why they didn't have a little bit more success, how they kind of ended up in the one-hit wonder bin when it comes to musical history. Like I said, that label of one-hit wonder, at least when it comes to this band, the BUGGLES, is something that I completely disagree with. This was a band that was, if you are a child of the 80s, and if you were a fan of MTV, which I definitely was, up to the point when they basically still played music, this is a band that is hugely important, at least in my opinion. So if you haven't gone back and checked out these two BUGGLES records, The Age of Plastic or Adventures in Modern Recording, I would highly recommend it. I do not believe that you will be disappointed. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back every week for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, talk to you then.